The history of African Americans in tobacco is a compelling story, one that reveals a distressing tale of greed, manipulation, and brutality. Tobacco, the root of slavery, is a captivating lesson about the powerful influence tobacco has had in the African American culture. No other industry has done more to both benefit and to kill African Americans.
What you have is a very strange set of dependencies. It's a dual dependency. We can see it in terms of the nicotine, which is a dependency of addiction. And then we can see it in terms of the money that comes from the industry, which is a dependency of the almighty dollar. Both dependencies intersect and create a situation for the African American community where we lead the nation in disease and death. I want to repeat that. The African American community leads the nation in terms of tobacco-related disease and death. Now, when you stand back and you look at the relationship between the African American community and the tobacco industry, you have got to place it in some kind of historical context where you understand there was an absurd kind of path to freedom during slavery. There were jobs galore in the tobacco industry. There was money coming into the community in the 1940s and 1950s. We were recognized first by the tobacco industry before any other industry recognized us in terms of advertising. And then you fast forward to the 1980s and 1990s, and you hear black leaders defend their relationship with the industry. I'm telling you, this is a story that has nothing but ironies.
Contrary to popular belief, the first blacks to arrive in this country were not slaves. The first black settlers were indentured servants who shared a common lifestyle with white indentured servants. For over 40 years after they first arrived, blacks accumulated land, voted, and mingled socially with whites. Those who paid their debt became well established and carried no implications of racial inferiority. So what changed the status of blacks in the New World? How did they go from being accepted members of society to slaves? Simply stated, it was the demand for tobacco. The money to be made from this new cash crop increased the necessity for cheap labor. As the colonies prospered, the slave trade thrived, eventually robbing blacks of their freedom.
We were slaves. We had no choice. That's a certain kind of dependency. You turn it around, and some slaves were able to take that tobacco and turn it into a cash crop and buy their freedom with it. One of those very strange dichotomies. We were slaves and we were picking it. And we took the money and we bought our freedom. Come forward 300 years. We are free and we are smoking it. And we are taking the money to do what with? Buy our economic freedom? Yes, yes, and yes.
After the Civil War, even though most blacks were no longer slaves in tobacco fields, they continued being the primary source of cheap labor that fueled the giant tobacco companies of today. The tobacco factories offered blacks jobs when others wouldn't. The fact is, these jobs were the worst in the factory, and blacks were underpaid and segregated. The industry exploited the plight of blacks in the factories and in advertising. Blacks were depicted as caricatures to entertain whites and to promote tobacco products. In many ways, they remained slaves.
So we were used in a very vicious way by the tobacco industry to sell a product that wasn't necessarily coming to us in terms of us being customers, but yet there we were. We were working the factories. We were being used in terms of caricature, in terms of advertisement, but we were not the customer, not yet. In the 1950s, The tobacco industry was the first industry to use middle-class African Americans in advertising. They were the first. Strange as it seems, the tobacco industry has been an incredibly progressive institution as far as the black communities. They were the first to use us in advertising. 1940s, 1950s, they began funding organizations like the Urban League, like the NAACP. The dollar began coming into our communities.
The tobacco industry holds a unique position within the African American not-for-profit community. Thus, while other private sector corporations turned their heads to black organizations, tobacco companies took advantage of the opportunity to buy into black culture and capture a lucrative market that was largely alienated. Tobacco companies began advertising in black newspapers and magazines in the 1940s to play on blacks' apparent desire for upward mobility. Many of these groups are just as addicted to the money as smokers are to the cigarette.
Ebony magazine. About 20 years ago, they did an article on the 10 leading causes of death in the black community. And they went down their list. Now, you know the number one preventable cause of death for the black community is tobacco. Ebony went down the list. Now, this is our flagship magazine. This is our magazine that theoretically is educating our community. Tobacco was not mentioned once in this article. The point being that Ebony's responsibility is to educate and provide information to the black community. They couldn't do that about tobacco because they were co-opted. The responsibility of our educational institutions is to promote the well-being of the black community. They cannot do it because they're co-opted by the tobacco industry. The responsibility of our leadership is to defend and promote policies that are for the well-being of the black community. We can't do it because we're co-opted by the tobacco industry. How did we pay for the support that the tobacco industry was giving the black community? We paid the way we always pay, with our health and our lives.